Do, do, do. All right, everybody. If you don't know, now you do know. You're officially tuned in to a very special edition of the HFWB podcast series. This is your host, Clifton Pope. And like always, this episode of the HFWB podcast series is brought to you by goandfeelgreat.com, because when it comes to health, there's usually a gap between where we are and where we want to be. With so many processed food and modern farming techniques, it can be difficult to find nutrition-rich food, which is why you need to trust the Feel Great system to feel great for the long haul and overall just give you that high quality support that you need without a doubt. So that's why I'm encouraging everybody to go and visit goandfeelgreat.com, since this episode of the HFWB podcast series is being sponsored by goandfeelgreat.com. But with that being said, I would like to welcome my guest for today. And man, I've been looking forward to having this person on my podcast for quite some time, just because here at Health, Fitness, Wealth, Business, as you know, it's about generational health, and I'm a firm believer of healing ourselves from within, natural living with a holistic approach. And the person who I'm about to bring on can probably explain that way better than I can. Why do I say that? Because she's a board-certified doctor of natural medicine. That's one thing. She's also a clinical and alchemical herbalist, an aromatherapist, a certified phlebotomist, an RBTI practitioner. Oh, and by the way, she holds certifications in autoimmune protocol coaching and holistic cancer care. So with that being said, and on top of that, she's also a business owner too of the Wild Hair Apothecary, which we'll definitely get into here in a moment. Basically, it's where conventional medicine meets natural health modalities. And why not bring in the lovely Dr. Ladonna Rocha to the HFWB podcast series to where we could break down this conversation. How are you doing on this wonderful Friday, Dr. Ladonna Rocha?
Doing great. Thank you for the introduction. That was fantastic. You really summarized a lot of things in there, and
Yes.
I'm excited to be here. So I can't wait to get started.
No, without a doubt. And I mean, I want to get into your overall backstory, Ladonna, because a lot of people don't know that medicine has kind of been a thing that's kind of intrigued you ever since your early days, from apparently filling water-filled syringes into your stuffed animals or pretending to do so. And then fast forward into your 20s, boom, throwing right in there as a surgical tech. And then it's like, damn, I want to go even further. Now you're over here transitioning into surgical first assistant program, specializing in neurosurgical licensed first assist for 10 years. So kind of break down, Donna, how you kind of fell in love with medicine first and foremost, and what made you want to become just a doctor just to begin with? Because we always have those visions like, hey, I want to be this, I want to be that. What made you, Ladonna, say, hey, I want to be a doctor and I want to make a difference in conventional medicine?
Right. I know everybody is kind of looking for this story where, I knew I wanted to be a doctor since I was a little kid, and I did everything right. I checked all the boxes and I got there. Yay. And that's not really how it worked for me. I think I'm probably a really good lesson in perseverance. And just plain stubbornness in some situations. So I grew up, I say that I grew up in the hospital system, but it probably started about that early. My family, I'm one of 5 children, and 3 of us had 1 in a billion kind of chance diseases. And so literally from the age of about 3, my sibling just younger than me was diagnosed with a really unusual form of cancer at a very young age. I believe he's still one of the youngest documented cases of prostate cancer. And so that threw my family into the medical arena. And so while my mom was teaching me how to read in a hospital room next to my brother, I was exposed to that at such an early age. So that became kind of the norm for my life.
Right.
But when we start looking at how really the natural medicine side became interesting to me and really a draw, I learned to read really early. My mom was really big about education, and my mind just
Mhm.
processed it really easily and really well. And so I started reading early. So by like first grade, I was reading Little Women and things like that. So the
Okay.
books that I was exposed to, and I loved history from a very early age. My dad's a huge history buff. So I loved the history of medicine before I understood what it was and before I could recognize it was this and now it's this and what happened in there.
Mhm.
So going through that, I'd love to say, I just knew I wanted to be a doctor. I did really well in school. I studied hard. I didn't. Things just kind of came naturally, and I could figure it out. And I would say, well, I just test really well. That's what it is. I'll never forget failing chemistry my freshman year
Mm.
because I was just obsessed with a book I was reading, and it was funny because the heroine in the book was a time traveling herbalist, and I was like, that
That's
is
an
so
interesting
neat,
theory right there, actually.
right? It's an amazing series. They actually just made it into a TV series, which I kind of watched with one eye closed because it's never like the book.
Gotcha.
And I remember
Gotcha.
thinking my chemistry teacher would walk by and take my book away, and I was like, "Well, when am I ever going to use chemistry? This is ridiculous." And I
Mhm.
never really had a plan. I was just going to grow up, and I don't know if something was going to fall in place. And then I got pregnant in high school, and then it was well. Now you made some decisions and everybody's just kind of biting their tongue because you're never really going to be successful now because you made some stupid decisions.
Yep.
And so it was like, all right, let's see how this goes.
Just
And I
let's
respond.
adapt.
Yeah. And I think that is a really under recognized character, positive character trait for people because life's not just going to be easy the whole time. And your ability to adapt and how you respond to stressors and how you respond to conflict says a lot about who you are. And so I just kept going. And my mother was really big about just get a degree. You've got
Yeah.
to have a degree. You
Yeah.
need something in there. Yeah.
Education is a big thing, and it's
Oh,
not
absolutely.
information I like to say this, Ladonna, that information is the new money because the more informed and the more
Of course.
educated you are, the more powerful you are to a sense to where it's like things like money and other resources are naturally just going to flow to you because you got the information, you got
Yep.
the knowledge and the resources behind you.
You'll never lose your investment there. And I think
Exactly.
we're not really understanding that as well as we should. So I went into, I had an uncle that said my mother had married my stepdad, and his family is amazing. We're probably a really good example of how incredible step families can be too. And he said, "Have you thought about surgery? Your personality would really do well in there." And I didn't realize he was speaking to the type A part of me. So I went into surgical tech programs. I loved it. It was the first job I held for more than 3 months at a time because I just loved the function of it. And then, well, where do I want to go from there? And I'm always looking for that next rung on the ladder. And it's been really interesting because the past couple of months has made me reevaluate that ladder in a way differently than I have in any other phase of my career, and is really influencing some changes that we're making. But so I went into surgery. I really love neurosurgery. I got picked up immediately out of first assisting programs because I want to do the fun part. I don't want to just hand you the tools. That's wonderful. I want to be the one using the
I
tool.
want to get my hands dirty and roll up my sleeves.
Absolutely.
I
There are
love
not a whole
it.
lot of people who can say, "Well, I held the brain aside while we fixed this vessel and then I closed everything." Like, that is a really cool job. And I think it's one of those jobs that is really under recognized in the career areas as an option. Like, you can do some really amazing things in there and not necessarily be a nurse. We have amazing nurses. There are people who are really just naturally gifted in that area. And I would constantly have people in some of my other jobs, like when I was working towards my certifications and my license, say, you you really ought to consider being a nurse. And I recognized that they were saying, you're really smart, you need to do something with that. But I was like, you don't want me to be your nurse. Like, I am not. You need sweet people to be your nurses, and I'm not.
Don't take
So
my kindness for weakness now. There's another side of me that I keep hitting very, very well.
right, and we all do.
Of
And it's
course,
it's
without a
so
doubt. Without a doubt.
interesting. It is really, I'm a people watcher, and that works really well in my career because in a lot of situations, I'm answering. I had a client this week, and I said, I'm making recommendations and I'm speaking to you based on what you're not saying because there is so much more in that context than just the symptoms that you're telling me about. So, I got into neurosurgery and licensed first assisting. I loved it. And then COVID hit. And the whole time I had been studying because there's such a draw for natural medicine for me. And there's so much opportunity to do so, to take a system that is really incredibly effective, enough so that it causes problems in our society, and do it even better. And it was
Yeah.
really funny because I remember thinking, well, conventional medicine is the educated side, and I'm going to get into that side and really help straighten things out. And then when I
Yeah.
started making that move, I'm like, hang on, they actually know what they're doing. And it's actually the conventional medicine side that is kind of missing some marks here. So I thought I was going in to help fix this side, but really I'm going in to do the other. And so I
That's
recognized a need for somebody to stand in the middle and say, yes, conventional medicine is necessary and is helpful in certain situations,
yeah.
but we really have got to look at our current health state and how this needs to be done differently because every single other country in the world is doing this except us. Why? Like, what is going on there? But, and I tell my clients, we still need structure.
Oh yeah.
To each personality, they're going to be drawn to different things. But for me, I want natural medicine. I want us to work on why you got here so that we can actually help your body heal permanently and not
Mhm.
just here's a band-aid with a flower on it and we're going to call that natural medicine. And that's a lot of what I see done. We need to do this with structure and strategy in place because that's
Yes.
where you really see measurable change and you can say, I know this worked because dot dot dot. And to
Yes.
have somebody that will stand in the middle and do that and also have the titles necessary so that conventional medicine will even pay attention to the conversation. It's a really interesting field. And when COVID
Yeah.
hit, our surgery schedule backed off. And I remember somebody saying, "Oh, aren't you worried all your surgeries are going to be canceled?" And I said, "I'm in neurosurgery. We're about to send everybody home and lock them inside four walls with their families and all of the conflict. Do you think there won't be head injuries? I promise I'll be busy." And it was
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
but less gallbladder surgeries. But trust me, we had head traumas coming out our ears. No pun intended. But it was an opportunity for me to start making that transition and
Yeah.
start moving. And I straddled that line between the two fields and got myself into a position where we could shift. And I'll never forget. Uh, I mean, call was so stressful, and there was a lot of stress involved in the company I was working with. And my husband finally said, "You need to make the call. This is the time. Make the switch. Don't worry about what the numbers look like. You can do this. You're going to be fine. Do it." And
Love
that
it.
was that point that I was like, okay. And that was right as we started having all of the issues with the vaccination demands and all these things. And I'll never forget a lot of the conversations that happened in there. And the conversation went from, well, why are you even talking about that? You're not even a doctor. And in one conversation, I was like, well, actually, I passed my boards this morning, so I am now. So on that note, and it was just a really interesting time. And for me, the spiritual context is really important because we are, like you mentioned, the four corners. I talk to my clients about it's a Venn diagram. We're physical, we're emotional, and we're spiritual. There was a spiritual aspect to my career path, and it was very much that Esther mindset where you're called into this. There's a
Mhm.
reason why you grew up interested in what you did. There's a reason why
Yes.
you've done the things you have. There's a reason why your personality is the way it is. That's not accidental. And so that puts you into a position to be effective and be a tool. And I think that is probably the most rewarding part of that field. And I hope that's what the case is for anybody working in any kind of field, because to be working in your calling is different than working in your title and your
Yeah.
chosen career path or whatever that is.
And it's funny how you mentioned working in your calling, LaDonna, and following your calling because I myself was it's kind of like we have similar paths to a certain degree because I was somewhat involved in conventional medicine to a certain degree with me working as a pharmacy technician for Walgreens for 4 years and working closely
Mhm.
with pharmacists as far as distributing the medications to the patients and everything. And then when COVID happened, an epiphany just came upon me to where it's like, the last thing people want to do is go to pharmacies and pick up their medicines because
Right.
that's just depressing enough within it is based on their current condition that they're in. And then at the
Yes.
same
It's
time,
admitting failure.
Exactly.
Some
And
of
then
that.
when I think about it, it's like, whatever happened to like the natural approach, whatever happened to natural living with a holistic approach? I was thinking about that during the pandemic while we were all in lockdown mode, floating
Right.
around in our thoughts. And then that's what led to me starting my own holistic personal training lifestyle coaching company, which we now know as Health, Fitness, Wealth Business. That was back in 2021. Fast forward, we're here in 2024. And it's like, most people don't realize with conventional medicine, all it really is basically herbs that are synthetic mixed with a
Yeah.
bunch of powder and chemicals. So basically,
Right.
it's herbs still in conventional medicine. It's just covered
Yeah.
up in like powder and everything. It's like, where you got the all white purpose flour and then you got the wheat flour. I feel like the wheat flour is the natural living versus the all white flour, which is very popular
Exactly.
and very well known. That's the
Which
conventional.
cracks me up when people are like, "Well, herbalism doesn't really work as they drink their coffee." And I'm like, "Are you sure? Because that aspirin you just took is actually from an herbal component, and
So this
it's
leads to me asking you this,
right."
Ladonna. This is something that's kind of been like a mission, I can tell, pretty much your whole entire life.
Mm.
How can we bridge the gap between conventional medicine and natural living with a holistic approach, aka natural health modalities, as you describe?
There's so many answers to that, but I
What would
keep
be
thinking,
your best
"Okay,
answer
let's."
off the top of your head?
If we track it as far back as we can go, it has to go back to responsibility. And I think that's why we're struggling in the
Yep.
US so much because we don't really have a responsible kind of a culture. It's and you can put that into any context. I mean, we're seeing that so much, and maybe it's we're seeing it more in this current generation. Maybe it's just I'm old enough to pay attention to it now. I don't know. I don't know the answer
Probably a
there.
little bit of both, if anything.
Right, right. I think so. It's you're not going to see any kind of culture that's self-governing. Say, you know what, we should do this the harder way because it's the right way. You don't
Mhm.
usually see that. I think it really comes back to if we will understand that, that'll change how we approach everything because it's easy and it's kind of a scapegoat thing to say, well, I can't control that. That's just I was just born with that condition, or I'm just, my mom had diabetes, so I'm going to have diabetes. No,
No,
we talk. We've got to quit using those as excuses.
exactly.
I'm diabetic, and my mother was never diabetic, and I had to recognize the choices I'm making in my lifestyle and working too hard and too long and too much and too high of stress levels is what got me here. So we have to stop and say, yes, I did this, but my body's made perfectly and it can get out of this. And I think it's really interesting that so many of the diseases that are killing us in the US are so easily fixed by taking responsibility for the choices we're making, whether that's in our
Yeah,
lifestyles,
lifestyle
our foods.
changes, diet,
And
exercise,
that's
all of that.
hard. And I say that from my standpoint. It is hard when everybody else is eating donuts and you're like, okay, not an option for me. It's difficult to make those
It
choices,
is.
and I think you can do kind of one of two things. You can be like, "Well, not my fault, not my problem," and die as a result, or you can do what we're also seeing, especially in social media, is this with the pendulum just swings from no responsibility. It's just what we're going to do, all the way to the other side where it's like a hypersensitivity, and every single thing. Oh my gosh, what water are you drinking? Oh, you can't drink that. Oh my gosh,
Yes, yes.
stop. Like, we've gotta quit doing this weird abusing ourselves kind of thing,
Mhm.
especially allowing influencers to wag the dog. We're constantly letting the tail wag the dog when it might not even be your tail. So we've kind of gone into this different kind of irresponsibility where we accept everything and everybody's an expert, and every single TikTok I see relates to my health, despite the fact that I'm completely different than every single other person out there. And nobody wants to stop and say, you know what? A colon cleanse might not be the right answer for me. A liver cleanse might not fix my problem. And maybe I need to look for a resource who can help say, no, that's not good for you, but this is a better alternative because you're right. You are seeing this in your body and you are feeling this. But it all tracks back to there's got to be that decision for responsibility.
Mhm. No, and you make a very good point because a lot of people don't realize this, and you could attest to this, Ladonna. People don't realize that we have the ability to rise above our whole entire DNA, and we could literally
Mhm.
restructure our whole entire
Oh,
DNA
absolutely.
compositions just by simple lifestyle changes like just exercising more, eating right, getting an
Yeah.
adequate amount of sleep, making sure you're drinking at least, for instance, a liter of water a day. It's like I tell my personal training clients like this all the time. It's like it's a balance between like the yin and the yang factor as far as balancing out the masculine and the feminine energies, as far as from the six components of just better movement, primal pattern movement, better breathing techniques, practicing on breathing in and out and incorporating that into your movement. Overall, just getting the right adequate amount of sleep. That way your circadian rhythm is perfectly balanced, because we should be really getting to sleep from like about 10:30 p.m., even though it's very hard at times, because that way we can have enough time for the circadian rhythm to kick in, to where we can have the body do its necessary physical repairs from like 10
Yep.
p.m. to 2 a.m. and then 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. That's where the
Yeah.
mental repairs take place. And then just, again, better nutrition habits, better hydration habits, and just overall better just thinking habits as well. Like you just alluded to, thinking more responsibly,
Mhm.
training your mind to take control of those actions to where your body can overall follow suit. It's just like I mentioned
Well,
before we just started recording, it's just balancing out just the four components of just the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And that's why I love how your private practice, the Lamp and Leaf Holistic, just focuses on that entirely. Like, in your eyes, Ladonna, what would you feel like is the perfect balance on how we can balance just the physical, the mental, and the emotional and the spiritual? Because it's like a four corner square that just goes all the way around. But for
right.
those who are listening, who are wondering how they can balance all that out, what would be your best strategy?
The first one is you've got to get honest with yourself. And I think our society blocks that because it's so much busyness and it's so much outside noise and outside influence. And you
Yep.
can package something so that it looks good for you. Let's look at the drug commercials on TV, and the irony that in the US, we're not number one, the fact that drug companies are allowed to advertise in the US is unusual for any other country in the world.
Mm,
And natural medicine is not allowed to advertise. So that alone should tell you that there's something sneaky going on there. But
exactly.
there's so much noise and we can package, oh well, I'm paying attention to my health because I follow X, Y, and Z people on my social media. And I watched this TikTok that told me that I need to do this. We're still listening to outside. We are so conditioned to ignore the intelligence that's in our bodies
Hmm.
and our own expertise on ourselves. And you know, I'll get clients in and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you know so much," blah, and I'll stop them and I'll say, "I appreciate that. I've worked hard to get here, but this is a team concept. I know my stuff, but you know you, and you're the expert on you, and we have to work together so that we can get these things accomplished. I can't just show up and start yelling at you about everything I know. That's not going to do anything but make me look like a jerk. We have to work together." So
Yeah.
I think really the key thing, and it sounds so simple and so silly, but it is really the first step. You have to assess where you're at right now. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, I'm teaching a master class next week in Rockport that's a free class, and that's part of what we're gonna talk about because the spring season is really the beginning of the natural year, and
Yeah.
this is the point that we should be starting to say, "Okay, what do I want my year to look like? Where do let me do a really honest evaluation and say, 'I'm doing good here, I'm doing
Hmm.
all right here, but I'm struggling, and I'm completely neglecting this part,' and it's showing up because when one area, I mean, we're a plate on a ball, and so if this area is lacking, our whole plate is going to tip towards this
Yep.
corner
The
and the
seesaw
rest of my
effect.
system will
Yep.
have to compensate. My physical body will have to compensate if my spiritual body is being starved. We
Mm.
have to pay attention to those different things. And in the US, we act like we're just walking bags of bones. And well, I got up and walked today. I was able to breathe this morning, so I'm good, I'm healthy. And it's like, wow, we are not using that word in the same way. And it's,
Yeah.
that's why we have people that are functioning and they go to work and they do the thing because they can. And I should be healthy. And you're looking at all the information, you're like, you are incredibly unhealthy. And that's, I had to do that myself. I am
Hmm.
incredibly unhealthy in a couple of areas. And that's why I'm making those adjustments because for me, authenticity is really important. And if you have had a conversation with me, I'm very plain spoken and I'm very, well, this is what it is. And this is like, I'm not a sugarcoater, and that changes how people relate to me a lot. And that's okay because I'm not accidentally hardwired this way and I'm not broken, just like somebody who's very sweet and very compassionate isn't broken either. They're not weak. They're hardwired to be kind.
Hmm.
Wonderful. That's a great thing. But we have to be able to have those hard conversations,
Yeah.
especially with ourselves. And to me, looking at kind of those 4 post-it notes and saying, okay, well, I'm doing good here. I'm working really hard here. I need to improve there. And this part is starving to death. I
Yeah.
have to do that if I'm asking somebody else to do that. And for me, there's an energetic exchange there. So you don't want an unhealthy doctor working on you, because we will remedy you through our eyes. And if I'm lacking here and I'm unbalanced here, I'm going to unintentionally project that onto you. So we have to have healthy practitioners
Hmm.
responsibly working. And that's really tricky in this culture, because we have this really weird dynamic where anybody who can read a good Pinterest post is all of a sudden insert title here.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because even people who have done the work and done the hard things and studied and all these things and checked all the boxes, it is really unsettling when we hit this point where we're like, hold up, that something's still not right here. I have A, B, C, D, E. Okay. Why am something's missing? What's wrong here? Why isn't this working? And it's no different than, why am I eating, drinking, exercising, breathing, and I'm still sick? We have to do that in a professional context where we're like, I have this, this, and this, and that was what I really wanted. Why is something still missing here? And that's a lot of what I've been looking at and really having to analyze in myself lately.
Hmm.
What do I need to be doing different? What needs to change so that I can grow into that next level and make
Hmm.
those adaptations to be where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah.
So it's complex.
No, it's like you basically hit the nail on the head, Ladonna. It's just being honest with yourself and just looking yourself at the mirror like, hey, I need to
Mm,
grow in this aspect. I can evolve in that aspect. And I can just
right,
overall just find room for improvement in all levels. That way we can
right.
feel as balanced out as possible, because that's what makes the journey of life much interesting, because we don't have all the answers, but at the same time
And you won't ever.
we don't have all the questions to those
Yeah,
answers yet. So it's like, when you look at life from that perspective while you're evaluating yourself, the world kind of turns into like a big old library, to where it's like you could pull down a book and like, here we go. Oh, here we go
right.
here. And then again, that just feeds into just being the best version of yourself that you can be, from a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual aspect, because it
Yeah,
all aligns together as one, because it's like, train the mind, the body will follow. And at the same
right.
time, we all have access to that powerful spirit that's within us, to where we could strengthen it by tapping into it with forms of just prayer, meditation, working on
Yep.
our breathing, stuff like that. It's just, everything all just comes together at the end
Yeah.
of the day, without a doubt.
And everywhere else, that's seen as part of health until you get to the US. And then it's meditation, breathing techniques, okay, hippies. And it's dismissed. And it's, if we
Yeah.
don't get past that concept and we don't really kind of like re-educate ourselves and look at why we believe this in the first place and what systems we need to break in that,
Mhm.
we're not gonna get to where we actually understand health outside of somebody clutching their pearls and being like, oh no, we can't do that. And I'm like, what do you think prayer is?